Welcome everyone to a continuation of our course series on resistance medicine. This is part of our ongoing series on crisis preparedness that focuses on resistance medicine, action medicine, street medicine. Today we are talking about cold-related injury prevention and treatment. So we're going to get into how people who are going to be helping their communities in the cold, whether they're street medics or volunteers for other actions, should prevent their injury and the injury of others, and then how to identify and treat various very common injuries. So we're going to talk about hypothermia, frostnip and frostbite, trench foot, chilblains, cold-induced urticaria, cold-induced bronchospasm, and then right at the end, if we have any time, I'll talk about some simple recipes that you should learn how to make if you're going to be going out and doing this in your community. Specifically one that I really want to share with everyone. All right, let me proceed. So as a reminder, who we are. Sanctum of the Craft is an anarcho-socialist witchcraft collective and seminary. We teach adversarial witchcraft that specifically is in opposition to restrictive Christo-fascist state structures. We are not aligned with neo-fascist, Christo-fascist movements and oppose dogmatic, authoritarian, and state-aligned religious oppression. You do not have to be a witch to make use of any of our content. We have content online that is more clearly specifically for witches, and then we have stuff that anyone can make use of. We welcome all who welcome all, and we are intolerant of intolerance. Moving right into our content for today, let's talk about homeostasis. Ultimately, the body's function is to survive. A body's survival is dependent on its ability to maintain and restore homeostasis. Homeostasis is the stability, balance, equilibrium, and relative constancy within an organism, all the way from a single-cell organism to the entire human body. An organism has to maintain a relatively consistent internal environment. Keeping a stable internal environment involves constant adjustments as conditions change inside and outside every single cell, all the way up to inside and outside the entirety of the body as you go through your day. The constant fluctuation and adjustment of body systems to maintain homeostasis is referred to as homeostatic regulation. Because the internal and external environments are constantly changing, whether looking at an individual cell or an entire body moving around, adjustments must be made constantly and continuously. Homeostasis is a dynamic and fluid equilibrium rather than a rigid one. It's flexible, it changes, it's relatively adaptable. Thermoregulation is a vital part of the body's ability to maintain homeostasis. It is the body's attempt to balance heat production and heat dissipation. The human body needs to maintain a constant core temperature of approximately 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius, at which point its metabolism functions normally. The temperature of the skin and the extremities fluctuates a lot more. So your hands can be much colder than that and you still have homeostatic regulation. But if your core temperature plummets a lot lower than that, then you have a problem. The body produces heat by metabolizing nutrients, mostly carbohydrates and fats. Even if a person is on a no carbohydrate diet or thinks that they're on a no carbohydrate diet because the understanding of what actually constitutes a carbohydrate in America is really weird. Celery is mostly made of carbohydrates, and yet people don't think so. They're still getting carbohydrates in their diet, and they're necessary because otherwise their body dies. The basal metabolic rate, the energy used by the body at rest by a body going through its normal metabolic processes of a person, is higher during cold weather. It takes more energy for the body to maintain thermogenesis in the cold. The colder it is, the harder it is for a body to stay warm. How much extra energy a body will need to stay warm varies by many individual factors. Age, whether someone's AFAB versus AMAB, how much stress their body is under, their nutritional status, like are they malnourished, are they undernourished, how have they been sleeping, what's their hormone balance, do they have any chronic health conditions, etc. Body surface area also has a major effect. As the ratio of body surface to body volume increases, heat loss to the environment increases. Exertion in the cold also increases the body's metabolic rate and thus the energy needs. If you are out shoveling snow so that your neighbor can safely navigate a wheelchair or a baby carriage across their sidewalk, you are going to need more fuel. The body is constantly shedding heat, whether we want it to or not. Even if we are already very, very cold and we need our heat, the body will continue shedding heat because we have a heat exchange with our environment. The body sheds heat in 4 ways, other than through behavioral changes like seeking shade, going into air conditioning. These are conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. These mechanisms cool the body when the outside environment is colder than the skin temperature. In a warm or hot environment, these mechanisms may actually transfer heat into the body, although evaporative cooling may still occur so long as humidity is not over 75%. Conduction is the transfer of heat from one thing to another through direct contact. More heat is transferred from a very hot object to a relatively cooler object. More heat is also transferred if the area of the surface contact is larger. Some surfaces conduct heat much more effectively than others. Metal conducts heat faster than concrete, for example. So sitting on a cold metal bench or a hot metal bench can more rapidly affect the temperature of all tissues that are in contact with it, the back, the buttocks, the thighs, etc. If you've ever touched hot metal in the summer, you have experienced the conduction effect. If you've ever touched a piece of cold metal in the middle of winter, you have experienced the conduction effect of heat transfer. Air is relatively bad at conducting heat, so less than 2% of body heat is lost to it due to conduction. The ground is a much better conductor and can take a lot of body heat from a person. Water is an extremely effective conductor of heat. A person who is working in a cold, damp environment may lose heat rapidly to clothing that has been soaked with rain, snow, or perspiration. Falling into cold water is extremely dangerous, as the cold water will rapidly pull heat from the body. Insulation slows down conduction, which is one reason why dressing with the appropriate insulation is very important in cold weather. Convection is the transfer of energy due to the movement of molecules in a fluid, which can be a gas or a liquid. Air is a fluid. When air or water moves across a person's body, heat is lost to it. In cold weather, more heat is lost if there is a big difference in temperature between the fluid and the object. So the colder the air or water, the more heat is lost due to convection. More heat is lost if there's a lot of exposed surface area for the fluid to make contact with. So if you're wearing shorts and a t-shirt in winter, there's a lot of convection-based cooling going on. Additionally, the more rapidly the fluid is moving and the body within that fluid is moving, the more rapidly heat is lost. So falling into a still, cold lake is less dangerous than falling into rapidly moving cold water. And staying still in a cold environment loses less heat to it than a body that is running. This is why wind chill is a factor in how quickly a body loses heat in an environment. The faster the wind is moving, the more chilling it is. Clothing that is windproof is more protective against this particular effect. Respiration. Heat loss through respiration involves both conduction, heat lost from the blood to air from surface contact that's occurring in the lungs, and convection. Warm, moist air moves out of the lungs and cold air moves into the lungs over and over and over again every time you breathe in and out. Respiration is a significant way that people lose heat in cold environments, especially if breathing rapidly. The percentage of body heat lost to the environment by breathing varies significantly based on environmental factors and how active a person is. It may be as low as 2% in some environments and as high as 30% in very cold weather when breathing rapidly. A scarf or a gaiter worn over the mouth and the nose can help insulate from this effect. Sorry, one moment for slide difficulties. Radiation is the transfer of heat in the form of waves or particles, which includes the radiation of heat from the body to the environment. Human bodies can lose more than 65% of their heat in this way if the environment is cold, or gain heat from radiation in hot environments if the environment is hot. Evaporation is the conversion of a liquid into a gas, during which molecules with more energy, heat, escape into those with less energy. Cold, that should say cold. Sweating and heat dissipation by evaporation cause about 30% of the body's cooling. In hot environments with lower humidity, evaporation is the primary way that the body is cooled down. But evaporative cooling can still happen in the cold, especially on dry, cold days when a person is sweating heavily from exertion or from illness. Evaporative cooling can also happen due to wet clothing, which causes heat loss by conduction while wet and cold, and then by evaporation as it dries. Okay, any questions on how the body is losing heat to its environment? There's a comment in chat. There's a trade-off between your body generating more heat when active and losing more when moving. Also, you wear yourself out faster if you're being active to generate heat. Yes. When we get to the section on hypothermia, we'll touch on the fact that during less severe cases of hypothermia, some people advise that you move your body because that will generate heat. But there is a trade-off, like a balance of risks to be taken there. Prepare to be outside. People should avoid being outdoors in the coolest parts of the day. They can check weather predictions for temperature fluctuations during the day and plan accordingly, although generally the warmest part of the day is in the middle. People should avoid extreme activity during the coldest part of the day, as exertion worsens heat loss to the environment. Extreme temperatures also worsen fatigue and cause stress, which restricts the body's ability to maintain its homeostasis. People should not restrict their energy intake during activities in the cold. They need to give their body adequate fuel to warm themselves. They should eat a good, balanced meal of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins before activities, snack as needed through activities, and eat again after their activities. They should not restrict their food intake unless indicated by other health condition. People should drink large amounts of non-alcoholic decaffeinated fluids before, during, and after activities in the cold. They should not restrict their fluid intake, again, unless indicated by another health condition. Although it is a myth that hot drinks raise core body temperatures, they don't. Frequent breaks to drink something warm can make a person feel warmer and reduce the stress of their activity. They should avoid large amounts of caffeine, which can hinder the body's temperature-regulating mechanisms. They should avoid alcohol, which can also lower their core body temperature, despite making them feel warmer. Alcohol increases blood flow to the skin, causing heat to dissipate faster, which can lead to hypothermia, especially in cold weather. That thing that they used to do where they would send rescue dogs with alcohol, that should not be done. No more alcohol to rescue people in the cold. People should take frequent breaks to reduce stress and strain on the body so that they continue maintaining their own body heat in the cold. Aid stations can be set up for cold weather actions. People should take frequent breaks to warm up, dry off, and have something to eat and drink. Pop-up tents with walls and either wool or mylar blankets can be used to give people a break from the cold. Okay, I only have 2 students with me today. I'm just going to call that out on YouTube when this gets posted. If you both have attended classes where we have gone over what to wear for wind and extreme cold, I can skip that information for now. I covered it in how to dress and what to pack for street medics, and I covered it in bug out bags for extreme weather conditions. So I'll just wait to see what y'all have to say about that. If you have not, okay, so one person was there for the medic packing one. Waiting for a response from the other person.
They unmuted.
Oh, yes, go ahead, answer.
Is your volume turned way down?
No, it's not turned off. It's turned all the way up.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead. I'm not hearing anything when they speak. Can you message them in chat? Okay, perfect. Then I will go ahead and skip this information because I don't want to take anyone's time covering something that we've already covered.
For YouTube. We're
For
gonna
YouTube.
We're going to try and put a box right here.
Yeah, for YouTube, I will put a little link right here that takes you to the videos where we cover what to wear and what to pack for extreme variations in temperature. We did go into some more information in these slides specifically on the different kinds of chemical heating packs. But I think, shall I go ahead and get into that, or?
Sure. Do you want to get into the new information about chemical heating packs and towels?
Yeah, so I added a couple things on the what to pack section for extreme cold, and I guess I'll just touch on those really quick before we move on. We're going to mention a lot through these things called chemical heating packs. There are essentially two types, reusable and single use. Single-use heat packs are activated in one of two ways. Some require unwrapping the heating pack, exposing it to the oxygen in the air. Typically, this contains a combination of salts and damp iron powder, and the heat is generated by the energy generated as the iron rusts at high speed. Others require squeezing, which causes chemicals inside the pack to combine in some form of relatively slow exothermic reaction, which basically means that they release heat slowly over time. Reusable heat packs contain a supersaturated solution of sodium acetate and water, and a metal disc in the pack is flexed in order to start a crystallization reaction. This causes the energetic value of the crystal lattice to be released in the form of heat, generally over the course of a few seconds. They can be reused after being submerged in some hot water. Chemically, this additional energy redissolves the sodium acetate, returning it to the state of a supersaturated solution so it can be used again. Conceptually, this can be thought of as adding heat to the pad to be released later when the disc is flexed. Single-use heating packs generally continue to emit heat for longer than reusable ones, and they're preferable when the goal is to either have a semi-sustained heat source while you're trying to warm someone up over the course of several hours, or to have something that can be given away to individuals who need them. But reusable heat packs are more useful in situations where a single burst of heat, perhaps inside an insulating layer such as a glove, will be useful and would generally be part of the kit that a medic would keep for personal reuse in the future. So they would bring the single-use heat packs to either give away to people or to use to rescue someone, and then they would bring the reusable heat packs or electric heating devices for their own use. And then we talked about towels. Did that get a slide? No, it didn't. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that you should also consider bringing reusable camping towels. They make hyper-absorbent camping towels now that are very effective. They take up very little space in a medic's kit, and they dry off very quickly, and they are able to absorb a great deal of water off of a person's body. So if you have reason to believe that you will be drying someone off who either has gotten their clothing soaked by a water cannon or rain or being around the snow or falling into water, and you need to get a lot of cold liquid off them very quickly, leaving them standing naked for as little time as possible or partially naked for as little time as possible, then camping towels are the way to go to have those in your medic kit. Okay. Any questions on that before we move into prevention of injury for things like hypothermia and frostbite? I know we just kind of blew through that section, but I really don't want to take up anybody's time if they've already attended something. Someone commented in chat, the standard ratio is 4 times the weight, so a 3-pound towel could absorb 12 pounds of water.
Yeah, they were very absorbent.
All right, if no one has any questions, we will continue. Let's get into cold-related injuries. Prevent injury if possible. Treating cold-related injuries is difficult without removing the injured person to a warm environment. The best treatment is prevention. Keeping someone warm and dry is easier than warming or drying a person. Early intervention is much easier and more effective than trying to rapidly treat a person with worse injuries. Pay attention to warning signs. The first sign that there is a risk of cold-related injury is feeling cold. If a person feels cold, not a little chilly, but actively notes that they subjectively feel cold, that is the time to put on more insulating materials and seek a warmer environment. It's like how the first sign of dehydration is thirst. The first sign of cold-related injury is feeling the cold. The second sign of a risk of cold-related injury is shivering. Although hypothermia is defined as a decrease in core body temperature starting at around 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius and dropping from there, the mechanisms of hypothermia actually start at a much higher temperature. You are starting to descend into hypothermia before the body temperature ever drops that far. It is a myth that only extreme cold can cause hypothermia. An older person with acute alcohol use disorder can become hypothermic in a home heated to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 15.6 degrees Celsius. People who are in wet clothing or submerged or immersed in cold water can also become hypothermic even in non-freezing temperatures. The body regulates its response to cold temperatures by increasing thermogenesis and decreasing thermolysis, the body's natural process of dissipating or losing excess heat. If the body's temperature continues to drop, it will stimulate shivering. The body will constrict its vascular action, keeping heat from dissipating. So it's basically going to lock down on veins and try to keep the blood in the core and not going to the arms, the legs, the fingers, and the toes. As the exposure to cold continues, eventually the body can't keep that vasoconstriction going to restrict heat loss. It runs out of energy and literally cannot lock down the veins anymore because it takes energy to do that. And the body suddenly goes into vasodilation, which is where all the veins open up really wide. This causes the core body heat to be lost very rapidly in a sudden rush away from the core. This is one reason why people stop shivering. The body literally runs out of energy to shiver, and there's a sudden rush of heat away from the core. Risk factors. These make someone more likely to develop hypothermia, but they're not required for someone to do so. Anybody can develop hypothermia. This just makes it more likely. People with decreased thermogenesis. So these are people who struggle to generate enough heat for their bodies. Infants, the elderly, people with dysautonomia, people with class 3 or severe obesity, people with alcohol use disorder, diabetics, malnourished people, starving people, people with hypothyroidism, people with hypoglycemia, people with immotility disorders, people with liver disease, people on tricyclic antidepressants, people on phenothiazines, people on benzodiazepines, and people with meningitis. People with increased thermolysis, so people with dysautonomia, people with hyperthyroidism, people with class 3 severe obesity, and people with malignant hypothermia. Fatigued people, people with substance use disorders, people who are dehydrated, people who are undernourished or malnourished, people who have been through a recent trauma, people with severe bleeding, people experiencing shock, people with severe burns, people with sepsis, wet clothing, cold water submersion or immersion, wind chill temperatures, acute spinal cord injuries, and diabetic peripheral neuropathies.
Also Raynaud's.
Yes, Raynaud's. That is also a major risk for frostbite.
Yeah.
Okay.
I only know that. Because it's directly relevant.
Types of hypothermia. Acute. Acute hypothermia is also called immersion hypothermia, but it does not actually require immersion for it to be caused. It is the rapid onset of hypothermia, often caused by a person being soaked in cold water. It can happen because they fell into cold water, were completely soaked by environmental conditions like falling rain or snow or being hit by a water cannon, and in acute hypothermia, the onset of cold core temperatures occurs in less than 2 hours. Subacute hypothermia is when hypothermia occurs from exposure to cold conditions for 2 to 6 hours. Generally, somewhere around 4 or 5 is where you're looking at subacute hypothermia. Chronic hypothermia is when the body temperature takes longer than 6 hours to arrive at the reduced body temperature. It can take days to occur. It causes other physiological effects as compared to acute hypothermia, which include dehydration, exhaustion, and dangerous chemical changes in the body. Chronic hypothermia can occur at temperatures between 30 degrees Fahrenheit to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, so 0 to 10 degrees Celsius. It is extremely common amongst the unhoused, the elderly, and amongst disabled people who are living alone. Unfortunately, a lot of the time the symptoms are mistaken for something else. Other hypothermias. Primary hypothermia is the term for hypothermia that is caused by cold exposure, whereas secondary hypothermia is caused by other problems such as severe sepsis. Trauma-related hypothermia is caused by blood loss and is part of the trauma triad of death. More on this later. Yes, trauma triad of death is the actual term. The temperature of the human body varies away from the core. In very cold environments, the extremities can be very cold. So this is your fingers, your toes, the ends of your arms and legs, but that is not a reliable indicator of the internal temperature of a person. It's often difficult to get an accurate core temperature reading in the field. If you are running around as a medic, you actually need a special thermometer just to get an accurate reading. In order to read body temperatures below 95.9 degrees Fahrenheit or 35.5 degrees Celsius, people need a special thermometer. They need to check that their thermometer is rated for hypothermic temperatures before attempting to use one to measure a hypothermic person's temperature, because it will just lie to you. It will just say that it's higher than it is because it can't register any lower. Different kinds of thermometers and why they do or do not work in the field when it's cold. Infrared forehead thermometers, I can talk, are used to measure the temperature of the temporal artery using an infrared sensor. They are good for detecting fever, but not great for use in the field. They give less accurate readings of very cold skin, and they're not good for diagnosing hypothermia. Tympanic temperature is taken on the eardrum, which measures the intracranial temperature. Some search and rescue medics carry specialized thermistor-based types of tympanic thermometers with good insulation, which are useful for assessing hypothermia. They offer a fast, non-invasive core temperature reading close to the hypothalamus. But regular infrared tympanic thermometers might struggle with accuracy in very cold environments or water-related hypothermia. Additionally, they're a little difficult to learn to use safely, and a lot of people use them incorrectly. Oral. In the field, oral temperature, and I apparently did not change the images here, so I apologize for that. Sorry, everybody. In the field, oral temperature is commonly used, but it should be noted that can vary pretty dramatically from the core body temperature if the person has been mouth breathing or drinking hot or cold liquids. It can vary by nearly 1 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.6 degrees Celsius from the core body temperature, even if the person has been heavily exerting themselves or drinking hot or cold liquids. However, many medics use it and they just adjust the temperature by about 0.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.3 degrees Celsius to 1 degree Fahrenheit or 0.6 degrees Celsius. Axillary temperature is taken using a digital thermometer under the person's armpit, directly against the skin. However, it again will likely be colder than their actual core body temperature, and the reading has to be adjusted. Rectal thermometers. The most accurate means of determining core body temperature is to use a rectal thermometer capable of reading hypothermic body temperature. However, medics should refrain from taking people's rectal temperature. Can anybody tell me a reason why a medic might not be able to take someone's rectal temperature? Why that might not be appropriate for a medic? Nobody? All right, I'll leave it to you to guess why that might not be appropriate.
That's as an exercise for the viewer.
Temperature range controversy. There are arguments on what core body temperature different stages of hypothermia occur at. Many medics use signs and symptoms rather than temperature ranges to make the call on what degree of hypothermia a person is suffering from. What temperature? The 2014 WMS Practical Guidelines for Out-of-Hospital Evaluation and Treatment of Hypothermia defines mild hypothermia as a core body temperature of 95 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so 35 degrees Celsius to 32 degrees Celsius. Moderate hypothermia as between 90 degrees Fahrenheit and 82 degrees Fahrenheit, so 32 degrees Celsius and 28 degrees Celsius, and severe hypothermia as below 82 degrees Fahrenheit or 28 degrees Celsius. Some experts have proposed an additional level of severe hypothermia, representing a core body temperature of less than 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, so 24 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Celsius. The American Heart Association guidelines, which were recently updated in 2015, define mild hypothermia as greater than 93 degrees Fahrenheit or 34 degrees Celsius, moderate hypothermia as between 93 degrees Fahrenheit and 86 degrees Fahrenheit, so 34 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius, and severe hypothermia as less than 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Celsius. It's not necessary, though, to actually have those numbers memorized or even to get an accurate temperature rating to begin treatment for hypothermia. It is important to emphasize that you can recognize the signs and symptoms of hypothermia on a person and not go, oh no, I don't have my thermometer with me. I can't possibly treat them until I confirm that they for sure have these specific body temperatures. You need to start treating hypothermia in the earliest clinical stage possible. Do not wait for there to be a technical threshold for hypothermia that has been met to start treatment.
No, you're still too bored.
Yeah. Even when the core body temperature is greater than 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius, the person may still show obvious signs and symptoms of hypothermia. Fortunately, at that stage, the body generally can compensate for the condition through thermogenesis until they find a way to increase heat production or until they find a way to boost their energy, because as they're trying to warm up, the energy that is stored in their muscles and liver is being exhausted. And eventually they will run out of fuel and start progressing through the stages of hypothermia. So, what are those early warning signs of hypothermia that I keep mentioning? Let's talk about the umbles. Mild hypothermia has a set of signs and symptoms referred to as the umbles. The National Institutes of Health even initiated a public awareness campaign to help the public notice and act on hypothermia before it worsens, using the umbles as the signs to watch for. The umbles are the grumbles, which is a shift in mood or behavior, irritability, confusion, unusual negativity. The fumbles, loss of fine motor skills, struggling with zips, clips, holding equipment. The mumbles, slurred or slowed speech, quiet voice, or difficulty finding words. And the stumbles, unsteady movement, tripping, veering off balance, falling behind. And the crumbles, serious deterioration, disorientation, collapse, or unresponsiveness. This may also include paradoxical undressing, which we're going to get into in a minute. So the early stages of hypothermia affect cerebral and cognitive functioning. People develop coordination and fine motor control issues, the fumbles. They have difficulty moving around and maintaining their balance, the stumbles. They have speech difficulties and incoherence, the mumbles, the grumbles. And they become incoherent, mumbles, grumbles. Eventually, they begin having trouble staying upright and continuing to function, the crumples. The last stage is a critical, life-threatening state where the circulatory system fails to maintain adequate blood flow, pressure, and volume to the body's organs, leading to severe hypoperfusion, oxygen deprivation, and potential organ failure. This is called hemodynamic collapse, which is essentially a form of severe shock, characterized by very low blood pressure, rapid heart rate, confusion, and shortness of breath. A person collapses, crumples, and is then considered to be in the secondary stage of hypothermia. Other people may present with a slightly harder to read set of symptoms. They have a flatter, less exaggerated effect with symptoms that more closely resemble cognitive dysfunction, like what can be caused by a stroke or by dementia. They are more likely to present with dysarthria, a motor speech disorder caused by neurological damage affecting the muscles for speech, leading to slurred, slow, quiet, or even robotic sounding speech, mumbling, or difficulty controlling their volume and difficulty controlling their facial muscles. They are very likely to present with exaggerated ataxia, which is the medical term for that lack of voluntary muscle coordination, which causes the clumsiness, the unsteady walking, the speech issues, and the poor balance, the umbles. Unfortunately, in the elderly, people who live in a very cold environment, remember we talked about it could just be 60 degrees Fahrenheit for someone who is older and on certain medications or has alcohol use disorder, they can just look like they're getting older and their mind is going, or that they're struggling with their mental health, or that they're starting to have the signs of a stroke, when really what they're suffering from is hypothermia. Hypothermia impacts decision making. One of the dangers of even mild hypothermia is that it impacts our ability to think. Hypothermia dramatically affects and impairs reasoning. People with hypothermia may be apathetic and uncaring about their own symptoms. They may not be able to even recognize that something is wrong, and even if they can, they may not be able to think through and act on addressing the problem before it worsens. I'm going to take a brief moment and tell you all a story. So we just talked about the different stages and different kinds of hypothermia. I live in a house that was built in the 1890s, and when we moved in, there was no heat upstairs. We moved in on January 3rd, and I was the only person who was home here by myself during the day to start hauling boxes and furniture around the house. I spent a day moving boxes from downstairs, where we had moved them in out of the moving truck, upstairs into where there was no heat. And I did this all day, just walking boxes up and down the stairs, moving things around, moving furniture. And as I progressed, I got clumsier and clumsier and tireder and started desperately wanting mug after mug of hot cocoa, and started feeling as if I couldn't remember what I'd moved into what rooms and whether I was supposed to put this in this room or that room. And at some point in there, I went, oh shit, I'm hypothermic. But my decision making was impaired, and I very nearly damaged myself to the point where, like, I'm not exaggerating when I say that I did the absolute stupidest thing that you can do other than just not get any treatment at all. Because I walked into my bathroom, I stripped off my clothes, I filled the bathtub with hot water, and I climbed in. And then I screamed. I have a very high pain tolerance, and I screamed. And went, oh shit, you're not supposed to do that. Which we're gonna get into in a minute when we get into treatment of hypothermia. I'm a street medic. I've been a street medic for decades. I have a large amount of medical training. I knew not to do that. And as soon as I was warmed up, I knew that I had made a mistake. But while suffering from the effects of hypothermia, I could not think through what I should do instead of what I did. I did recover, obviously, I'm here. But now that I've had hypothermia that time, and other times as well, I am more likely to get it again in the future. So that's fun. That is how it works, by the way. So even someone who is a trained street medic who knows better can be affected by that cognitive decline caused by hypothermia and do something really stupid, like not recognize that they're becoming hypothermic, not take steps to address it, or take the wrong steps to address it and do them self-injury. Which brings me to paradoxical undressing. One of the dangers of even mild hypothermia is that it impacts decision-making. Hypothermia dramatically... Why is this the wrong paragraph here? I'm sorry, everyone. Give me just a moment to address this. Okay. Doo-doo-doo. How fast can I fix a slide?
Pretty.
Okay. One strange behavior observed in people who are in advanced hypothermia is paradoxical undressing, which occurs in up to 30% of fatal hypothermia cases. The combination of confusion and a false sensation of intense heat may lead victims to strip off their clothing, anywhere from partially to fully undressing. This drastically speeds up the fatal heat loss, often just before unconsciousness or death. This may be explained by the exhausted blood vessel constriction giving up on that constriction, causing a hot flash, or it may be due to a malfunction in the brain's temperature center. I highly do not recommend that you go looking for pictures of paradoxical undressing. I did because I was making these slides, obviously not doing a very good job making these slides, but I made these slides, so I went looking for pictures. They're extremely, extremely disturbing. It also makes it somewhat difficult when bodies are found in cold environments to determine whether they were killed due to some kind of violent assault or whether they undressed themselves due to paradoxical undressing. People can seem intoxicated. The signs and symptoms of this central nervous system dysfunction closely resemble those associated with head injury, alcohol intoxication, stroke, or acute psychiatric disturbance, such as acute psychosis. Unfortunately, due to this, many cases of hypothermia amongst the unhoused and low-income elderly just go unnoticed, with symptoms dismissed as indicative of other issues. This leads to a greater risk of death from hypothermia in already marginalized communities. So let's talk about how hypothermia progresses. As hypothermia progresses, peripheral vasoconstriction pulls blood away from the skin and the extremities towards the core to prevent heat loss. This is one reason why hypothermia and frostbite are so connected. So think for a minute about the body pulling all of the heat out of the fingers, out of the toes, out of the hands, out of the feet to the core, and why that might boost the chances of getting frostbite on the extremities. The vasoconstriction that prevents heat loss also concentrates blood volume into the inner core. This causes dehydration, which can be very severe, almost 5.8 quarts or 5.5 liters in someone whose core body temperature is below 90 degrees Fahrenheit, equivalent to the entire circulatory volume, pulls out of the limbs and goes to the core. Cold diuresis, an increased urge to urinate out extra body fluids, is a symptom of the progression of hypothermia. You suddenly want to pee a lot. The dehydration and hypovolemia, so low blood volume, then cause the heart at first to speed up. Then the heart starts to struggle with cardiac dysrhythmias and possible arterial fibrillation. This can increase the chances of a heart attack, especially in the elderly struggling with chronic hypothermia. So you have an elderly person living alone who is in a cold environment that is boosting their chances of a heart attack. In early mild hypothermia, the respiratory rate also speeds up, but as hypothermia progresses, it slows down. Cold-induced bronchospasms can occur, more on this later. As hypothermia progresses, the autonomic function of the airway declines and oxygen consumption decreases. So you start off with this very rapid breath, but then transition to slow, deep, sleepy breathing that occurs when oxygen consumption is cut down by about half. As hypothermia starts, the body shivers to produce heat, warming the core body temperature by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit per hour, so about 1 degree Celsius per hour. This increases the fumbles, making it harder for a person to have fine motor control. Cold muscles also stress and strain more easily. People become fatigued, weak, and stiff, and it's more easy for them to injure themselves in other ways, like dropping things, falling. It also uses a lot of energy, so as the body runs out of fuel, it stops being able to shiver. As shivering depletes the body's glucose stores, people develop sudden hypoglycemia. Insulin levels fall, and the body starts having to burn its fat stores for energy instead. Even the metabolism of drugs is affected, with drugs lasting much longer in the system of a person with chronic hypothermia, which can lead to medication issues, again, especially for elderly people who are living alone, who may suddenly have medication lingering in their system for a lot longer than they think it is. Treatment of mild hypothermia first involves preventing further heat loss. If the person is damp or wet, they need to be dried off. All wet garments should be removed. They should be insulated from further heat loss with warm, dry blankets and clothing. Give them seasonal hot drinks, and no, I'm not kidding. The second important part of the treatment is to provide fuel. The body is starving itself to warm itself up. When it runs out of fuel, it can't warm itself up anymore. So part of the treatment of hypothermia, so long as a person is conscious, is giving them hot, sugary drinks. It's a myth that the hot drink will raise the core body temperature. It doesn't. However, they can have a psychological benefit that eases the umbles by lowering stress. The primary benefit, however, is from the sugar. The body is burning through fuel. The hot drink should ideally not be coffee or contain alcohol. Something like hot cocoa, which contains a small amount of caffeine, is fine. You want to do hot cocoa, hot cider, hot juice, that kind of thing. For mild hypothermia, moving around is indicated as it can restore blood flow to the extremities. For mild hypothermia, being put into a warm environment around 82 degrees Fahrenheit or 28 degrees Celsius is ideal. At this temperature, the person treating the hypothermic person will not risk becoming overheated, but the hypothermic person will warm up quickly. The hypothermic person should ideally not be warmed up in an environment cooler than 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees Celsius, because lower than that, their body can still lose heat and continue transitioning to worsened hypothermia. You can feel like, oh, it's nice in here, it's 75 degrees, I'm nice and balmy. They are still losing heat at that temperature. Heat packs. There is some argument about heat packs. Some AHA guidelines recommend heating packs be placed in the groin, on the neck, and under the armpits to help warm a hypothermic person. The WMS recommends against this because the heating packs are not sufficient to raise the core body temperature and because they may cause burns if improperly used. However, the WMS still recommends heating packs can be used on the hands and feet to prevent frostnip, but this again needs to be carefully done and is not recommended for the treatment of frostbite. One thing to be aware of with a hypothermic person is that it's very easy for them to burn themselves because they don't feel heat the way that you normally would. So they can't necessarily tell you if the heating packs are burning them. So you have to monitor for it. Heated fans. I'm going to point you back to where we described the different ways that people warm up and talk about convection warming. Heated fans, we like the Vornado. They sell them at Costco every year. They're not expensive. They're very lightweight. They're easy to transport. Can be very effective at drying a person off while also warming them up. Heated blankets can also be used. The combination of a heated blanket plus a heated fan can warm people up at a rate of about 4.3 degrees Fahrenheit or 2.9 degrees Celsius per hour, which is much faster than just warm blankets alone, which is only 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.2 degrees Celsius per hour. Hydraulic sarongs. Street medics can carry heat-reflective blankets made of mylar and chemical heating pads to address heat loss and mild hypothermia cases. I also recommend that you carry wool blankets. I think you should carry wool blankets everywhere. I will belabor this point in literally every street medic class that I ever teach. If they are working in environments where winter conditions are severe and they are likely to have to warm someone without access to emergency services, so talking like wilderness support after natural disasters, actions like no DAPL, they may want to consider investing in a hydraulic sarong. A hydraulic sarong is a thin, double-layered blanket with plastic tubing laid out in a grid between two layers. Heated water from a camp stove, a medic tent with a hot water setup, etc. is then pumped through the tubing to warm the person up. No, I don't own one. It's on my list to acquire eventually. In worsening hypothermia, where the core body temperature is less than 82 degrees Fahrenheit or 28 degrees Celsius, the person needs to be medically evacuated by emergency medical services. Emergency treatment needs to be in a hospital with warm IV fluids, treatment with warm oxygen, body cavity lavage, esophageal warming tubes, etc. However, I will acknowledge that this isn't always possible. The following is not what is recommended, because what is recommended is emergency medical treatment by professionals. If that is just not feasible, this is then a secondary option, but it is less effective. If a person can be treated for more severe or worsening hypothermia by medical professionals in a hospital, they should be. I'm only including this information because I know of multiple times where someone was not able to seek out that care. I trained one medic who served in a condition, like in a place where people were getting hit by water cannons, and it was in icy conditions and they were not able to be evacuated for medical care. I've also helped people who cannot go into hospitals for other reasons, and I'm not going to get into that into a video that's going on YouTube. This is not recommended, but it is what to do if you can't do what I recommend. I'm hoping that makes sense and that I belabored that point adequately, but not to the point of beating a dead horse. In cases of severe hypothermia, chemical heat packs and the like will not add enough heat to rewarm the patient. They will just keep getting colder. Additionally, warming the body too quickly is extremely dangerous. The person can be stripped, placed in a warm environment like piles of blankets or sleeping bags, and surrounded by 1 to 2 mostly undressed people. No, you don't have to be all the way naked. You can be in your underwear, who warm them with their own bodies. As they begin to warm up and leave behind severe hypothermia, then heat pads can be added to the nest of blankets, and then as they are warmed further, can be placed in the groin, armpits, back of neck, etc. Warming should be gradual over a period of several hours. So first they start to warm up just to the temperature of sort of the nest of blankets and the radiant heat of those around them. Then you add the heating pads into the blankets, but not directly against their body. You don't actually put it directly against their body until you're sure that it won't burn them to do so or raise their extremity temperatures too fast, causing afterdrop. We're going to get into afterdrop here in a minute.
Oh, quick note.
Quick note from Ian off camera. Do you want to come where you can be heard by the mic?
Yeah, I think they can probably hear me here. This is the not recommended. However, in a case where, for example, you do have medical services on the way, but you're camping and it's a medevac chopper and you need to wait an hour, go ahead and start this protocol.
Yes, that is correct. Ian is correct. If you are waiting on medical services to arrive and they're not 10 minutes away, go ahead and do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just realized that was a case we didn't mention.
Yep. Do not rub them all over. It's a myth that their body should be rubbed all over to restore blood flow. If they have frostnip or frostbite, this is definitely contraindicated. But additionally, rubbing blood into the extremities is a bad idea for the same reason that putting the heating pads on them right away is a bad idea, other than the burning thing. The core needs to be rewarmed first. Restoration of blood to the skin and extremities too soon can cool the core and dangerously plummet their core body temperature. There's also a pretty widespread myth that rough handling of a hypothermic person can cause the heart to enter into ventricular fibrillation and trigger a heart attack. Although hypothermia increases the risks of a heart attack, rough handling doesn't increase the chances of this. Although weirdly, a specific kind of intubation can, but that isn't really relevant to street medics. Handling a person to undress them, put them into a warming environment, put them into a position between two bodies, put heat packs in place, etc., is not going to be what triggers a heart attack. Even if they do have a heart attack, handling them isn't why. Heating someone too quickly or rapidly dropping their core body temperature using bad warming techniques might cause a heart attack. Give them seasonal hot drinks? No, I'm not kidding. Once they're conscious and capable of drinking fluids, they may be given hot, sugary beverages like hot cocoa or cider. A warm, rehydrating solution is also a good idea, as hypothermia dehydrates and recovery is much faster when someone is adequately hydrated. Do not put them in hot water. I mentioned my silly story earlier. This is why it was dangerous. It is a dangerous myth that a person with severe hypothermia can be treated with a hot bath. Being placed into hot water can cause cold blood from the extremities to rush to the core, dropping the core temperature further and potentially causing cardiac arrest. The rapid external heat also causes blood vessels to open, which reverses the life-saving vasoconstriction and causes blood to leave the core. So the cold blood from the extremities rushes to the core, the hot blood in the core rushes to the extremities, and this can lead to shock. Hypothermic skin is also extremely sensitive to heat and burns very easily, even from water that feels just mildly warm to a person who is not hypothermic. It's not safe to put them in cool water either, which we have seen recommended. Cool water is the opposite of helpful. Cool water will steal their body heat and make them worse. You can kill someone with hypothermia by dropping them into hot water or cool water. Remember that water is an excellent conductor, so cool water will cool the body down. There was a theory that a warm bath could be used just on the trunk of the body with the extremities out of the water to prevent afterdrop. Afterdrop is the technical term for the sudden dropping of core temperature observed from full submersion or immersion in hot water. Unfortunately, a study found that this doesn't help and afterdrop still occurred, even keeping the limbs out of the water. The only way to use a bath to rewarm a person is to start with water that is room temperature, so like around 75 degrees Fahrenheit to like 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Not cool, not warm, but ambient. And even this is very risky, and the naked snuggling method is much more recommended. CPR plus warming. If the person has stopped breathing or does not have a pulse, they should be given basic CPR while waiting for emergency services to arrive. CPR should be continued while warming is occurring and should not be stopped until they are breathing normally or until the body has been warmed to at least 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Celsius and they're still not breathing. If the person is still unresponsive at that temperature, the victim may be considered dead. So why is there a specific temperature at which someone would be considered dead? It should be noted that some people with very severe hypothermia can appear dead, but the hypothermia may actually be protecting the brain and organs. Rewarming the person may actually restore pulse and respiration. This is why wilderness responders are taught a person isn't dead until they're warm and dead. Rigor mortis, fixed dilated pupils, absent pulse, absent respiration, and dependent lividity are not actually considered signs that someone is dead if they're suffering from severe hypothermia. However, there are some clear signs that someone is cold and dead with no ability to be resuscitated after warming. These include fatal injuries, of course, so if someone's been decapitated, they are dead. But additionally, if the chest is so cold and so stiff that it cannot be compressed during CPR, that person is very likely dead. But people have been known to be collected, to be taken, to be processed as a dead body, and as they warm up in the environment, they sit up. So
ambulance crashes from this.
There have been ambulance crashes because of this. So just be aware that this is a thing. Immersion not required for acute hypothermia. Although acute hypothermia is called immersion hypothermia, it does not actually require immersion in water to occur. It can happen in damp environments or if someone is dressed inappropriately in cold weather, especially if their clothing becomes saturated with rain, sleet, snow, sweat, etc. Quick freezing, quick warming. If someone has acute hypothermia and their body temperature has been low for less than 20 minutes, they can be rewarmed quickly. They should strip off their damp clothing, move their body, place themselves near to a heat source, a roaring fire, a heating fan, rub their chest and core, not their extremities, put on insulating clothing, and use heat sources to warm themselves. They can put heat pads on their inner thighs, under their armpits, on their hands and feet, and on the back of their neck and on their cheeks to warm themselves up really quickly. If someone has been in water of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, or cooler for less than a period of 20 minutes or longer, for longer than a period of 20 minutes, or soaking wet in the same temperature water from something like rainfall or water cannons, they are suffering from a severe amount of heat loss. After drop is a major concern. Ideally, emergency services would be contacted for severe acute hypothermia. Absent that as an option, treatment is extremely similar to severe chronic hypothermia. Blankets and body heat. They should not be submerged. They should not move around. They should not rub their limbs. They should not go into a hot bath. They should remove, or someone should remove it from them, any wet clothing, be thoroughly dried off, and be placed inside insulating materials like blankets, ideally in a space with a hot air fan or fire. At least one person should undress and use their body heat to warm the person. After their temperature has come up, heating pads can also be used, but they should be monitored, again, to prevent topical burns. All right, let's talk about the trauma triad of death. Yes, that is what it is called. If there is severe bleeding from an abrasion, an avulsion, a laceration, the medic needs to contact emergency medical services and render aid while waiting for them to arrive. If the person is bleeding in a cold environment, medics should be particularly concerned about the trauma triad of death. The trauma triad of death is the simultaneous presence of coagulopathy, impaired blood clotting, hypothermia, low body temperature, and acidosis, the body fluid becoming too acidic in a patient with severe trauma. These three conditions worsen each other in a vicious cycle. Some medical professionals are proposing a shift to a pentad model that includes a natural pattern of events occurring with hypoxia, low levels of oxygen in the blood as the main trigger for the development of hypokalemia, hypocalcemia, low calcium levels in the blood, hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, acidosis, and then hypothermia, as they feel the original triad fails to establish a sequence which would be relevant during the initial treatment of severe bleeding. But I'm going to stick for trauma triad of death because I think it is more helpful for medics at this time. Even mild hypothermia can inhibit clotting and cause coagulopathy. Coagulopathy leads to increased hypoperfusion, reduced blood flow, which causes the cells to have to use anaerobic metabolism as they aren't receiving enough oxygen. This causes acidic compounds to be released into the blood, which reduces myocardial performance. That then further reduces oxygen delivery even more, which further reduces the body's metabolism, and that leads to increased hypothermia. And this just keeps getting worse in a circle. Shock and cold. Trauma patients need to be kept warm. Even if it isn't cold out, heavy bleeding can reduce the body's ability to maintain its correct body temperature. However, in cold temperatures, the combination of bleeding and cold is extremely deadly. This is one of many reasons that all medics should carry shock blankets. If a person has been injured and is bleeding in cold weather, simply covering their body with a blanket is not enough to prevent hypothermia that can trigger the trauma triad of death. Something insulating needs to be put between them and the ground. This can be a mylar blanket, a few wool blankets laid on top of each other, layers of hoodies and jackets, stacks of cardboard, a stretcher, or even someone holding them and risking putting their body between theirs and the ground. Okay. That is hypothermia. I'm about to get into frost nip. Before I do so, does anyone have any questions about the treatment of hypothermia? Questions? Snarky comments? Anything?
Although we've had a couple more people trying. Yeah, I'm giving you notes.
Okay, moving on then. If you do have any questions at any point, you can raise your hand or you can drop them in chat. Frost nip. Many injuries caused by the cold are localized to exposed parts of the body and to the extremities. As heat pulls into the core to protect the core body temperature and organs, the extremities cool down. This increases the chance of cold injury to those extremities. The most common places people experience topical cold injury are the tips of the ears, the nose, the upper cheeks, and the tips of the fingers and toes. I want to let you know now that I did not include any pictures in this class of severe frostbite. Because I did not want to do that to all of you without having a pretty thorough trigger warning, content warning at the beginning of class. I do think that it is worth it for you to take a look at the different stages of frostbite if you're going to be working as a medic in the field so that you can recognize them. I'm just warning you that the images can be pretty graphic. Both frost nip and frostbite are ischemic injuries, meaning they are caused by reduced blood flow and thus oxygen and nutrients to the tissues, which causes cell damage and cell death. Frost nip is superficial, whereas frostbite can be superficial, partial thickness, or full thickness. Frost nip is a very light frostbite that is common in people who work in the cold or who participate in winter sports. If you, as a street medic, are going to help out your communities in the cold, there's a very real chance that you will see people with frost nip or develop it yourself. If it is caught quickly enough, it can be prevented from developing into frostbite. Watching for the first signs of frost nip is important, as early prevention in frostbite cases can prevent severe injury. The signs and symptoms of frost nip are easy to notice if one is paying attention. The tissue turns bluish, purplish, or white and goes numb. Frost nip can often be treated simply by breathing warm air over the extremity and then putting on an insulating material. They can use chemical or electric heating pads or step into a warm environment to warm up. The return of blood flow to an area generally causes redness and tingling. If the fingers are frost nips, people can make arm circles in the air to force blood back down their arm. Stomping the feet can also help with frost nip in the toes. However, these are temporary solutions. Without adequate insulation against the cold, frostbite follows frost nip. You'll just keep developing it. I'm going to just demonstrate what I mean. This is what I mean. Arm circles. Making arm circles can help get the blood back down into the fingers and delay the development of frost nip, but you still need to go get on some gloves. Frostbite is a dangerous freezing of tissues that occurs because of ischemia, the restriction of blood flow. As temperature drops, vascular constriction occurs. In the cells of the fingers, toes, nose, ears, etc., microvasconstriction occurs as water shifts around in the body. As the tissues dehydrate and the constriction restricts blood flow, the fluids in the cells literally freeze and turn into ice crystals. This causes cell damage and, in severe cases, cell death. Some people are more prone to frostbite due to poor circulation and other medical conditions. There are also behavioral issues that can lead to increased risk of frostbite. Risk factors: poor circulation, Raynaud's, dysautonomia, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and others; impaired sensation from nerve disorders, diabetic neuropathy, fibromyalgia, dysautonomia, chronic pain conditions, high opiate use; hypothyroidism, arthritis, dehydration, malnutrition, being unhoused, starvation, including starvation diets and restrictive eating disorders; infants and children, the elderly; impaired judgment from substance use, fatigue, stress, trauma, mental health conditions; alcohol use and abuse, especially heavy drinking in the cold; frequent nicotine smoking, which constricts arteries; inadequate clothing, restrictive and tight clothing, direct contact with cold objects, and hypothermia are all risk factors for developing frostbite. But you can get frostbite without these risk factors, they just increase the chances. All right. Had that on there twice. I am just going to delete that, or I'm going to try. Nope. Okay, never mind. Signs and symptoms of mild frostbite: numbness, tingling, burning, white skin, bluish or purplish skin, firm skin, swelling skin, and pain. The skin will be firm to palpitation, but the underlying tissue should still feel soft. As thawing occurs, the tissues will swell, sting, burn, and turn red. Dull or even throbbing pain can persist for days and even up to weeks after the initial injury. Signs and symptoms of more severe frostbite: numbness, hard skin with no sensation, white skin, yellow-white skin, mottled blue-white skin. More severe frostbite. The damage caused by deep frostbite often occurs during the thawing process. As the tissues thaw, partial refreezing can occur as water in the tissues liquefies and then refreezes, causing tissue damage. Reperfusion injury can occur, which is the paradoxical tissue damage that occurs when blood flow is restored to an oxygen-deprived ischemic area, overwhelming the tissue with oxygen, triggering inflammation, and causing oxidative stress that damages cells. As thawing occurs, the injured tissues turn red and purple, swell up, and become extremely painful. Gangrene, which is permanent cell death, can occur within a few days, causing a need for amputation of part or all of the damaged area. It is the same information again, isn't it? Medics should not attempt to thaw deep frostbite in the field because severe damage can occur if the tissues are partially thawed and then refreeze. That is where you get really bad deep frostbite. If emergency medical services are not available and the person cannot be treated in a hospital, then the following can be done. But the recommendation is to seek emergency medical services. This is like with hypothermia, y'all. I'm not telling you that this is what to do. I'm telling you that what to do is to contact 911. I'm telling you, get them to the hospital, get them to an ER. However, I understand that there are situations in which that is not feasible. Maybe you're in the middle of nowhere, right? And you're at a hunting cabin and emergency medical services are hours away. Okay. Maybe you're at a protest in the middle of nowhere in the snow and everyone's been being hit with water cannons and they're not permitting emergency services in and you have to just do what you can. Or maybe for whatever reason it is not safe for you to go to a hospital. Then this is what is to be done, but please keep in mind that it is not the recommendation. Okay. The first and foremost important step is to get the person out of the cold. They need to be removed to a warm environment and all damp, cold clothing should be removed. Do not rub or massage the frostbitten area as this can cause damage to the injured tissues. Remember that there's ice crystals in there, and if you start rubbing at the ice crystals, it can actually cause them to rip up the cells. Rewarming of the tissues is done using a water bath with hot water. It is literally the opposite of treating hypothermia. You want to immerse the frostbitten tissues in hot water. And yes, it's going to hurt. The person can be given pain relievers, morphine, hydrocodone, acetaminophen before the treatment is given. Please remember that medics cannot legally dispense medication, and that does change your legal status and strip you of your Good Samaritan status and open you up to legal action. So, of course, I mean that only for emergency medical services. Water should be heated in a second container, tea kettle, pot on a stove, whatever, and then slowly poured into the water in the basin until the water in the basin is between 98 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, about 37 degrees Celsius and 38 degrees Celsius. The thermometer should remain in the water. When the water bath has reached the appropriate temperature, the medic should gently immerse the injured extremity. It will hurt. As soon as the water drops below 98 degrees Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius, temporarily remove the injured extremity from the water while more hot water is added. Once the temperature is back up to 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius, the injured extremity can be placed back in the water. The rewarming normally takes 10 to 30 minutes. What if they have frostbite and hypothermia? Because you treat these completely opposite. With hypothermia, you're supposed to warm someone up very, very gradually, and you're not supposed to pull any blood away from the core. But with frostbite, you're supposed to heat it as rapidly as possible and as smoothly as possible and not have a slow rewarming. So how do you do that? Basically, you do it at the same time. The treatment is done so that the person with hypothermia is wrapped in insulated materials and kept warm by a warming fan, a roaring fire, or naked bodies or semi-dressed bodies pressed close to theirs while treatment for frostbite is occurring. And then the extremity is considered rewarmed when it is warm to the touch, pink, reddish, burgundy, bluish, or purplish, and remains warm when out of the warm water, and then that can just get tucked down into the blankets with the person who is being rewarmed. The person should not ingest alcohol or use nicotine while the thawing is occurring. Once the rewarming is complete, the tissue should be gently dried. The medic should wrap them in sterile, non-adhesive gauze dressings, being careful to fully separate frostbitten fingers and toes with sterile dressings. The frostbitten tissue often blisters. Do not open any of the blisters that form. Treat them with sterile petroleum jelly and sterile non-adhesive dressings. Hydrocolloid dressings can be used on the blisters, which can cushion them from being torn open and provide a better healing environment. Medics should never cut any skin away. Ideally, treatment for the long-term injury caused by severe frostbite would be done by a medical professional. If a person cannot, for whatever reason, seek professional medical care in a hospital setting, they should consider trying to find it from the medic community. Some street medics are medical professionals, and a medic who is not should consider contacting one or finding a clinic that the person would be safe to go to.
I just noticed that you have your hand raised in Zoom. I'm not sure how long it's been like that.
Why is my hand up in Zoom? I don't know. How do I lower hand? Sorry about that. That's probably very annoying on the Okay. In cases where a professional medical care is just not available, the following would apply for long-term treatment, but please just don't. I'm putting it in here as a matter of crisis preparedness for like a collapsed government. I don't know. Get them to a professional.
If there is a professional, get them to the professional.
The blisters generally heal over 2 to 3 weeks. They need to be checked daily, gently cleaned with a burn wound wash, and treated with raw medical-grade Manuka honey and hydrocolloid bandages. Honey should not be used by those with a sensitivity to bee venom. In severe cases of frostbite, a black eschar or carapace can form, which is a form of dry gangrene. Medics should never attempt to cut away gangrenous tissue. The treatment is, instead, to wait as the blackened area heals over 6 months to a year. The black areas should be dressed with a honey alginate dressing, which combines medical-grade Manuka honey for antibacterial and healing purposes with calcium alginate from seaweed for high absorption of the exudate, the liquid that comes out from the gangrenous tissues, creating a flexible, moist dressing that promotes healing, cleans wounds, and manages moderate to heavy exudate from gangrene. The black eschar or carapace will eventually fall off, oftentimes taking the tips or the fingers of the toes with it, but leaving healed tissue behind. This only works if infection is prevented and is not recommended. Professional medical treatment where a medical doctor can assess whether debridement, surgical or with larvae, is necessary. Sanctum of the Craft is aware of medics who I will never name on camera who have successfully used larva debridement and honey in the treatment of gangrenous frostbite injury, but do not feel confident in teaching this. I don't feel confident in teaching this. I know of people who've done it. I'm mentioning that they do it. I think you should go to a professional. Larval debridement must not be done on people on blood thinning medications who have medical conditions that damage their clotting ability. Basically, what larva debridement is that larvae, maggots, are used to eat away the necrotic tissue, and they will only eat the necrotic tissue, leaving behind clean tissue, which can then be treated with the honey alginate dressings as if it is a deep burn. But I cannot do that. I don't have any confidence in my ability to do it. In cases of the most severe frostbite, also called stage 4 frostbite, the only thing that can be done is surgical amputation of the frostbitten extremities, which absolutely must be done by a trained surgeon. So, what do I mean these stages of frostbite? I actually like to do a 2-stage diagnosement of frostbite, but for the cases of, but do I need to get them to a surgeon? Let's talk about the 4 degrees. First degree is initial numbness, redness, and swelling upon rewarming, shedding of skin cells like after a sunburn, tingling, and burning while rewarming. The symptoms of second degree frostbite are basically all the symptoms of first degree frostbite, but with blisters. The symptoms of third degree frostbite are much harder tissue under the surface tissues before rewarming. Hemorrhagic blisters, so these are bleeding blisters. Sloughing off of the skin, so like after a really bad sunburn, when the skin just like flakes or slides off or peels off. Formation of the eschar, the hard, dry, black, leathery scab, referred to as the carapace as well. Skin necrosis, which is skin death. Pain emanating from the area to the rest of the body after rewarming. Fourth degree is a wooden feeling, severe burning, throbbing, and shooting pains emanating from the area to the rest of the body, non-blanching cyanosis, so skin discoloration that never fades away when you press on the skin. Tissue damage through the entire thickness of the part, including deep structures, possibly including bone, necrosis, dry gangrene, and wet gangrene. Severe frostbite can lead to wet gangrene, a serious condition where bacteria invade dead, damaged tissues, causing swelling, blisters, foul odor, and rapid spread, which requires urgent medical treatment with antibiotics and often surgery, debridement, or amputation to remove infected tissues and prevent life-threatening sepsis. I know of medics who have treated stage 3. Stage 4 requires a surgeon. It just does. And if that person has reasons not to seek medical contention, like medical help, then they are taking their life into their hands. It could kill them.
You get to see if this is why you make contacts with off-the-book surgeons.
Well, yeah. I hope that...
I don't think that got picked up.
Yeah. Evacuation. If a person has frostbite in the field and evacuation is necessary to get to medical treatment, it is important to note that damage to the frostbitten tissue is increased by how long it stays frozen. Because of this, it is actually not recommended that medics evacuate someone by carrying them on a stretcher if that will make the evacuation take longer. If it is faster for the person to walk themselves out of the wilderness than to be carried out of the wilderness, then that is actually what should be done, even though walking on frostbitten tissues may damage them, as it will damage them less than staying frozen for longer. So this is where you have to decide time versus the damage of walking on it. Let's say that you are in the wilderness and you are 2 or 3 hours from medical care, and it would take 6 to 8 hours if you carried that person. They need to walk. Yes, it is a bad idea to walk on frostbitten tissues. It is a worse idea to double or triple the amount of time those tissues remain frostbitten. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope so. Moving on. The person should never thaw their frostbitten feet and then try to evacuate by walking on them. They should instead walk on the frostbitten foot and then thaw the foot when in safe warm conditions. Up to 65% of people who have had frostbite injuries experience chronic issues, including hypersensitivity to cold, pain, ongoing numbness, and increased chances of developing frostbite again in the future. The more times you get it, the more times you will. Okay, trigger warning that I do have some kind of icky photos coming up, but they're not super bad. I did not do the ones that have really bad sores. Trench foot. Before I get into trench foot, any questions on frostbite? Questions, comments, concerns, sarcasm? Okay.
I just have a note.
Yes.
The diagnosis of stages of frostbite starts getting trickier when you have conditions that impair circulation.
Yes.
Because a lot of the visual cues are going to be wrong.
Right, you look like you're starting to risk frostbite when you're just walking around the house because you have Raynaud's.
Right. So you do need to remember and use the other indicators about level of sensation, prickling feelings, things like that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. That's helpful. Trench foot, also called immersion foot, is an injury to the feet caused by a combination of prolonged cool, damp environments. It does not require cold temperatures. It can occur at ambient temperatures as high as 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The moisture causes conduction heat loss as wet feet lose heat 25 times faster than dry feet. Both the soft tissues of the foot and the peripheral nerves can be damaged. Risk factors. Remember that you don't actually have to have these risk factors to develop it, but they do make you more likely. Poor circulation, Raynaud's, dysautonomia, EDS, and others, impaired sensation from nerve disorders, diabetic neuropathy, fibromyalgia, dysautonomia, chronic pain conditions, high opiate use, hypothyroidism, arthritis, dehydration, malnutrition, being unhoused, starvation, including starvation diets, and restrictive eating disorders. Infants and children, the elderly, impaired judgment from substance use, fatigue, stress, trauma, mental health conditions, alcohol use and abuse, especially heavy drinking in the cold, frequent nicotine smoking, which constricts the arteries, poorly insulated shoes, cotton socks in damp weather. Remember, cotton kills. Synthetic socks in damp weather, wet shoes, and hypothermia. Signs and symptoms of trench foot. Pale mottled skin on the foot or feet, red or bluish skin on the foot or feet, numb foot or feet, cool foot or feet, pulseless foot or feet, immobile foot or feet, wrinkly or pruny skin on the foot or feet, numbness, tingling, possibly swelling, pain, especially as drying off and rewarming, and a foul odor. Trench foot is prevented by wearing properly fitted, insulating shoes that keep the feet clean, warm, and dry. Wet socks should be changed with dry socks as soon as possible with the foot thoroughly dried before switching pairs. People should never sleep in wet socks or boots. They should not wear synthetic or cotton socks in cool, damp weather. Wool is emphatically recommended. They should always dry their boots and socks overnight if they have to wear the same pair the next day, and they should monitor their feet for signs of trench foot and to act to correct it as soon as possible. And the feet should be dried off thoroughly at the first sign of trench foot. They should then be elevated near a heat source like a fire or a heating fan. They can then be dressed in sterile dressings if necessary. In more severe cases, there may be a foul odor due to necrosis caused by fungal or bacterial infection, in which case the foot or the feet will have to be treated for infection. After warming, the foot may remain insensate and immobile for a few hours, then it may swell and turn red with severe burning pain. The swelling can last 2 to 3 days. Blisters may appear in the same time period. In severe cases, the tissue may slough off. In even more severe cases, wet gangrene may occur, which can be deadly if left untreated. Cold and damp sensitivity may continue for years after a single case of trench foot. The feet may develop ongoing hyperhidrosis, which is excessive sweating that endures for months to years after their incident, which also makes them more likely to develop another case of trench foot. Chilblains. Chilblains, also called pernio, are lesions on the skin caused by exposure to damp, non-freezing temperatures. They are most common on the feet, hands, ears, and lower legs. Risk factors include being an infant or a child, being AFAB, being amongst the elderly, poor circulation, Raynaud's, dysautonomia, Ehlers-Danlos, and others. People with immune deficiencies and abnormalities, so if people have lupus, HIV, or if they're going through cancer treatment. Impaired sensation from nerve disorders, so diabetic neuropathies, fibromyalgia, dysautonomia, chronic pain conditions, high opiate use, hypothyroidism, arthritis, dehydration, malnutrition, being unhoused, and starvation, including starvation diets. Sorry, for some reason it's refusing to change my slides. There it goes. Risk factors also include impaired judgment from substance use, fatigue, stress, trauma, mental health conditions, alcohol use and abuse, especially heavy drinking in the cold, frequent nicotine smoking, which constricts arteries, poorly insulated homes, homes without heating, sleeping in damp environments, staying in damp clothing, and restrictive and tight clothing. Treatment, by the way, which for some reason I don't have, is to get them out of the damp and get them out of the restrictive clothing and get them into a warm environment, and then to treat any sores as you would any other kind of small sore or ulcer. Paniculitis. Paniculitis is a subcutaneous fat disorder where inflammation of the fat occurs during prolonged exposure to cold temperatures. It often appears after people have been exposed to ice, including ice packs that are held in place without a cloth between the ice and the skin, children who have eaten popsicles, and equestrians who ride for long hours on cold saddles. I have actually had this one. It is not fun. It includes red swollen nodules, skin plaques, uneven pitted skin, and itching. Symptoms appear 24 to 72 hours after exposure and typically resolve on their own within 1 to 2 weeks. Sometimes there is some lingering temporary hyperpigmentation that clears up after a few weeks to a few months. Some medics have found it effective to treat the itching with antihistamines and anti-inflammatories, but there's really nothing you can do about it other than don't do that again. Cold-induced bronchospasm. Cold-induced bronchospasm is a form of asthma, sometimes referred to as winter lung, frozen lung, or pulmonary chilling. It occurs when a person is breathing rapidly in very low temperature environments below 20 degrees Fahrenheit or 29 degrees Celsius. Risk factors include asthma, mouth breathing, inadequate coverage of the mouth and nose during cold weather, smoking and vaping. Yes, even if what you're vaping is THC or herbal vaping, I know, is a thing now. It is the vaping chemicals that actually do it. The other chemicals, not the active thing like the nicotine or the THC or the cannabinoids or whatever. It's the vaping fluid that's the problem. COPD, high rates of exposure to mold and mildew, other respiratory tract infections, COVID-19, RSV, flu, cold, etc., and physical exertion in the cold. Signs and symptoms include wheezing, pain in the lungs, difficulty getting enough air, pain in the shoulders, pain in the upper stomach, coughing, and even coughing up blood. Prevention is the best treatment. People who are sensitive should wear a scarf or gaiter over their mouth and nose and prioritize breathing through their nose. The soreness and pain from cold-induced bronchospasm can be helped with drinking hot fluids, drinking extra water, steam inhalation, bed rest, and anti-inflammatories. I also have an entire write-up and live class that I taught on the treatment of cold-induced respiratory tract infections, and a lot of those same treatments can help prevent cold-induced bronchospasms. Cold-induced bronchospasms and pneumonia have very similar symptoms, but pneumonia will also include a fever, whereas cold-induced bronchospasm does not. Cold urticaria. Cold urticaria is a very rare hypersensitivity to cold air or water. Cold exposure causes itchy hives and inflammation, which can occur from touching cold items, being in cold air, or even drinking cold drinks. The symptoms generally appear within 30 minutes to a few hours of warming up and worsen as a person gets warmer. The range of reaction can be localized from small hives to headaches, palpitations, wheezing, and even to severe life-threatening anaphylaxis. It can be idiopathic, as in no one knows why it happens, or it can be an inherited condition. It can also appear in those who already have mast cell activation syndrome as one symptom of their mast cell activation syndrome. I included it here partially because mast cell activation syndrome is on the rise in the United States. Like, more people have it than used to. And so it is a concern if they're going to be working in the cold. People can be unaware they have cold urticaria until they are warming up from their first exposure to extreme cold. Treatment is primarily with antihistamines. In the very rare cases of someone developing difficulty breathing, treatment involves the use of an EpiPen and then emergency medical services. If an EpiPen has to be used, the person must follow up with emergency medical services. Something that I think people don't know about EpiPen use is it doesn't actually just like solve the problem. You can use an EpiPen, decide you're fine, go home alone, and die later because the EpiPen wears off and the allergic response continues. So if someone has to use an EpiPen, they have to follow up with emergency medical care. And now we end with state violence-related cold injury and a quick recipe. The police have used water cannons in freezing and sub-freezing weather to disrupt actions, including at the No Dapple protests. Water cannons in cold weather can cause head trauma, fractures, severe bruising, internal injuries, and hypothermia. Warming aid is vital if the action is to continue, which is one of the reasons why we spent so much time on hypothermia. But people also need to be prepared as street medics if they're going to be doing actions like that to treat the other things as well, the head trauma, the fractures, the severe bruising, the internal injuries, etc. And I want to point you back at the trauma triad of death. If there has been a trauma or if someone is bleeding in a cold environment, the hypothermia makes it worse. That makes that shock worse. And then the shock worsens the hypothermia in a really vicious trauma triad of death. So please be prepared if you are going to do actions like the one against the Dakota Access Pipeline, to not only have to treat those injuries in the cold, but that the cold is going to make those injuries worse, and those injuries are going to make the cold worse.
Right.
Okay.
Heated temps are super fucking important.
Yeah. I'm going to just quote to you all from Håkon Geiger's Riot Medicine. Tea, Soup, and Blankets Anonymous. In December of 2017, the German far-right political party Alternative für Deutschland was having a national convention in Hanover. Our goal was to disrupt the event by blockading the streets to prevent the delegates from making it to the event. It was scheduled to start at 10 in the morning, so to beat the police, we left where we were staying at 5 o'clock to be at our rally points at 5:30. After clashing with cops and getting kettled, the groups at the different intersections sat down to form sit blockades. Eventually, the police drove water cannons to the blockades and hosed down the protesters in sub-freezing weather. Some people were prepared enough to wear waterproof clothing, others brought umbrellas and emergency blankets to deflect the water, but most everyone got soaked. After the blockades, there was a march through the city. That meant some people were outside, maybe wet, for 12 hours in weather that only ever reached maybe 2 degrees Celsius. Luckily, there was a wonderful support from the community. There were stations with hot food and drink, as well as people with wagons led with that should be, filled, I think is what's supposed to be there, with hundreds of emergency blankets to hand out. Even some of the dry protesters were cold stressed, but they were able to wrap up and get something warm into them. The day was a success, and we managed to significantly delay the start of the event. I think if it wasn't for all the non-medics handing out hot drinks and blankets, we would have seen a lot more ill and miserable protesters. This is what I mean about a cold-related action where whether you are the medic or not, you may be exposed to sub-freezing temperatures, and everyone, whether it's just a volunteer or a medic, needs to be prepared for that and prepared to assist others who are dealing with it as well. This is the kind of situation, both the No Dapple protest and these ones. All right, I said that I was going to share only one of my recipes. Just really quickly, let me turn off my sharing of the screen, and we've talked before, specifically in the class on safe-ish protesting and the class on temperature-related injuries, specifically about heat-related injuries, about rehydration solutions. I want to remind you all that we covered that dehydration makes hypothermia worse, and hypothermia causes dehydration. Dehydration makes frostbite worse, and frostbite is very, connected with the dehydration cycle. So being able to rapidly rehydrate someone is very important, but you don't want to give someone cool fluids while they're going through hypothermia. So instead, our simple rehydration solution for the cold is hot water mixed 50-50 with hot cider or juice with just a pinch of salt. Hot water can also be mixed with honey or sugar, still with a pinch of salt. A simplified version of the most common solution is 1 liter of water, 25 grams of sugar, so about a handful, and 3 grams of salt, a decent pinch. A person should rehydrate for at least 2 hours at a rate of 1/2 to 1 liter of water per hour when dealing with cold-related injury and dehydration. I'm also going to be putting some recipes into the notes for a warming hot cider, a warming hot cocoa, my favorite broth that contains some immune boosting and warming spices. However, I want to note that in the field, you're almost certainly just going to be using tear open cider and hot cocoa packets. Now, if you have the ability to set up a medic tent and set up like a bench or like table with slow cookers full of spiced cider and slow cookers full of soup and slow cookers full of hot cocos, then by all means use these recipes. They are publicly available for anybody to use, but it would be my recommendation that you also just take out like hot water and tear open packets, and also have those when you are not going to have a full medic tent or kitchen support. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about what we've covered so far today? Questions, comments, anything? I'm going to ask again once I turn off the recording. Okay then, for YouTube, I will just remind everyone that the notes are on our Patreon. They are free and public to access. You do not have to be a patron. They're in a free collection called Crisis Preparedness, posted on our Patreon. If you do want to become a patron, you gain access to all of our other content. It starts at $1 a month. But all of our crisis preparedness content, including all of our street medicine stuff, will always be free. The bibliography will be added to the notes, as will the other recipes that I'm not getting into right now. And these notes will be being turned into one of our print booklets and being sent out to patrons who have the tier that pays for print benefits. And the only reason why we charge for them is because it does cost us money to print them, and we ask for the same amount of money that it costs us to print and mail them. Anyway, moving right along, if you are on our YouTube watching this later, if for any reason you need these notes, these slides, or anything sent to you, you can email us at staff@sanctumofthecraft.org and we will send them to you. And if you have any questions you don't want to email us, you can always ask us in the comments below. All right, that's everything I needed to say for wrapping up on YouTube, and I'm going to turn off this recording and ask anyone if they have any questions. Be safe out there, everyone who's watching this later.